The vastness of space over New Bastion was shattered by the arrival of the Imperial fleet. An eerie silence accompanied the appearance of the colossal ships, their shimmering shields glowing faintly against the planet's twin moons. This was the Unbreakable Armada, a testament to the Galactic Empire's dominance. They had conquered countless worlds, and their reputation for invulnerability preceded them. In the command center, Captain Elena Marcus stood at the helm of New Bastion's planetary defense forces. Her sharp hazel eyes scanned the holographic display, analyzing the sheer size of the enemy fleet. The main tactical screen glowed blue, projecting the Empire's formation in chilling detail: 15 cruisers, 5 destroyers, and 1 behemoth carrier hovering ominously in orbit. "By all accounts," said Lieutenant Harper from the comm station, "we should be dead already." His voice was calm, but his knuckles were white against the console. "Not today," Elena said firmly, breaking the tension with her quiet confidence. She stepped forward, her fingers tracing a path across the display. "They expect submission. What they don't expect is for us to fight back." A sudden transmission cut through the room. The voice was cold, dripping with arrogance. "This is Admiral Vraxin Telvar of the Galactic Empire. You have been deemed a rebellious outpost defying Imperial law. Surrender immediately, or your planet will be annihilated." The air in the room grew thick as everyone turned to Elena. She met their gazes, then turned toward the screen. "This is Captain Elena Marcus of New Bastion. Your threats mean nothing here. We are prepared to fight for our survival. Come and see." The transmission ended abruptly. A collective breath was released across the command center. Harper looked at her nervously. "Do you think that was wise?" "Wise or not, it was necessary," Elena replied, her voice steady. "If we hesitate, they'll smell fear. Let's make them regret underestimating us." Moments later, alarms blared through the base. The first wave of Imperial cruisers began their descent, their turrets glowing as they prepared to bombard the colony. On the ground, civilians scrambled to shelters as soldiers hurried to defensive stations. Dr. Raj Patel, the colony's chief engineer, burst into the command center, his lab coat flapping behind him. "The EMP artillery is ready," he said, his voice breathless. "But it's still untested at this scale." "It doesn't need to be perfect," Elena replied. "It just needs to work." Raj frowned. "If we overload it, the entire system could." "Doctor." Elena's tone cut through his hesitation. "We're out of options. Trust me, we'll buy you the time you need to fix it later." He hesitated, then nodded. "Understood. It's online now." Elena turned to Harper. "Lock onto their lead cruiser. Fire on my command." The first wave hit hard. Energy blasts rained down, shaking the planet to its core. The shields surrounding New Bastion absorbed most of the damage, but cracks began to form in the defensive grid. "Shields holding at 70%, reported Sergeant Lyle from the defensive systems console. "Not good enough," Elena muttered. "Harper, status?" "Target locked," Harper confirmed. "Fire." The room lit up as the anti-aircraft system activated. A high-pitched hum filled the air, followed by a blinding pulse of energy streaking toward the Imperial lead cruiser. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the cruiser's shields flickered violently and collapsed. A second later, plasma artillery struck its hull, tearing the ship apart in a fiery explosion. Cheers erupted in the command center, but Elena held up a hand. "Focus. They'll retaliate, and it won't be pretty." On the bridge of the Empire's flagship, Admiral Vraxin watched the destruction of his cruiser with narrowed eyes. "Primitive weapons," he sneered. "Effective only through luck. Deploy the destroyers. Wipe them out." His officers scrambled to comply, but Vraxin's confidence remained unshaken. "Unbreakable, indeed," he muttered to himself. Back on New Bastion, the defense forces braced for the Empire's counterattack. 2 destroyers descended into the atmosphere, their weapons systems glowing ominously. "They're going to focus fire on the colony itself," Elena observed grimly. "What do we do?" Harper asked. We split their attention. Elena activated the comms, addressing the entire defense network. This is Captain Marcus. Mobile units, draw the enemy away from civilian zones. Heavy artillery, target the destroyers. Keep them moving, we need them disoriented. As the ground forces mobilized, Elena's plan began to take shape. Mobile strike teams used the planet's rocky terrain to lure Imperial ground troops into ambushes, while the anti-aircraft system continued to fire on the destroyers. One of the destroyers took a direct hit, its shields collapsing as plasma rounds tore through its hull. The second destroyer, however, adapted quickly, evading the next volley and firing back with devastating accuracy. Shields at 40%. Lyle shouted. Elena clenched her fists. Patel, how much more can the system handle? Not much, Raj admitted over the comms. If we keep pushing it, we'll lose power completely. Elena nodded, her mind racing. Pull power from non-essential systems, she ordered. We're not losing this fight. On the surface, chaos reigned as Imperial ground troops engaged human forces. Sergeant Tara Wells led one of the strike teams, her squad taking out an advancing Imperial unit with precision and determination. They're relentless, Tara muttered into her comms. That's why we're better, Elena's voice replied. Hold your ground, Sergeant. In orbit, Admiral Vraxin watched the unfolding battle with growing frustration. Humanity's resistance was far more formidable than he had anticipated. They've developed countermeasures against our shields, one of his officers reported. How quaint, Vraxin said dismissively. But they won't last. Prepare the carrier for a full bombardment. Elena stared at the tactical display, watching the massive Imperial carrier position itself for an orbital strike. That thing could level the entire colony, she said quietly. Captain, Harper said hesitantly, what's the plan? Elena took a deep breath. We hit them first. Captain, with respect. Lieutenant, trust me. She turned to the team. Focus all remaining artillery on that carrier. Raj, divert everything you've got to make the next shot count. Yes, ma'am, Patel replied. The room fell silent as the anti-aircraft system charged for one final strike. Outside, the carrier loomed larger, its weapons preparing to fire. Now, Elena commanded. The pulse shot through the atmosphere, striking the carrier's shields. For a moment, the energy flickered, but then the shields held. No. Harper whispered. The carrier's weapons glowed brighter, ready to fire. Fire again. Elena barked. The second shot hit dead center. This time, the shields collapsed. A chain reaction of explosions erupted across the carrier, and the massive ship fell, crashing into the atmosphere in a fiery blaze. The command center erupted in cheers, but Elena didn't smile. She leaned against the console, exhaustion catching up with her. This was just the first wave, she murmured. And she was right. The air inside the command center felt heavy, each breath labored under the weight of what they had just survived. Elena Marcus surveyed the flickering tactical display as the aftermath of the first battle played out. Around her, officers hurried between stations, their voices tense but resolute. They had won a round, but the Empire was far from finished. Damage report, Elena demanded, her tone crisp. Shields at 32% and falling, Sergeant Lyle responded. We've diverted power from secondary systems, but the grid won't hold another sustained attack. Elena pinched the bridge of her nose, calculating their odds. The Empire's remaining fleet was reassembling in orbit, preparing to strike again. If the carrier had been a symbol of brute force, the cruisers and destroyers now seemed sharper, deadlier, a weapon wielded with intent rather than arrogance. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed as Dr. Raj Patel entered, his face smeared with grease and determination. We've patched the anti-aircraft system, he said, holding up a tablet. It's stable, for now. But if we push it too hard again, the capacitor could fry. Will it hold for another battle? Elena asked. If we're careful, Raj replied, though his hesitation was evident. Careful doesn't win wars, Elena said. She turned back to the screen, her mind already racing. In orbit, Admiral Vraxen's mood had soured. He paced the command deck of his flagship, his boots clicking against the polished floor. Below him, his officers worked in tense silence, wary of their leader's mounting frustration. How does a backwater colony inflict this much damage? Vraxen hissed. He stared at the holographic projection of New Bastion, the scars of his fleet's bombardment evident on the planet's surface. They're resourceful, his second-in-command, Commander Lake, ventured cautiously. Resourceful, Vraxen repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. No. This is desperation masquerading as strategy. And desperation always fails. Prepare the ground assault teams. I want that colony razed. Lake hesitated. A combined assault, sir? Orbital bombardment with ground forces? Do you intend to question me, Commander? No, Admiral, Lake said quickly, bowing his head. Good. Send the order. Elena watched as red markers appear on the tactical display. The Empire was deploying ground troops. Dozens of shuttles descended toward New Bastion, their escorts weaving through the atmosphere like predatory birds. Enemy ground forces inbound, Harper announced, his voice steady despite the tension crackling through the room. They're splitting their focus, Elena observed. Orbital bombardment and ground assault. They're trying to overwhelm us. What's the move? Lyle asked, his hands poised over the defensive grid controls. Elena took a moment, letting the weight of the situation settle before responding. We hold the line. Harper, coordinate with ground forces, have all mobile units ready to engage. Sergeant Wells' squad is still active near the eastern ridge, redirect them to intercept the first wave. Lyle, keep the anti-aircraft system locked on their ships. Raj. I know, Raj interrupted. Keep the system running, no matter what. She gave him a small nod. No matter what. On the surface, chaos erupted as the first wave of Imperial shuttles landed. Soldiers in gleaming armor poured out, their plasma rifles blazing. Sergeant Tara Wells led her team into position, crouched behind jagged rocks as the enemy advanced. Hold until they're in range, Tara ordered, her voice calm despite the storm around them. The soldiers waited, their weapons ready. As the Imperials moved closer, a sharp whistle caught through the air. Fire! A hail of bullets and plasma rounds erupted from the human line, catching the enemy off guard. The Imperials faltered, their rigid formations crumbling under the surprise attack. Keep pushing! Tara shouted, her own rifle glowing as she took down an enemy soldier. The fight was brutal, every inch of ground contested. Though the Imperials were better equipped, the humans fought with unmatched determination. In the command center, Elena tracked the ground battle while monitoring the skies. Status on the second destroyer, she asked Lyle. Still evasive, Lyle replied. It's moving faster than the others. Hard to get a lock. Raj, can we push the targeting system? Not unless you want to fry half the grid, Raj replied without looking up from his console. Then we'll have to improvise, Elena muttered. Harper, relay to ground forces, we're going to bait the destroyer lower. Have all anti-air units focus fire when it's in range. Roger that, Harper said, sending the orders. Moments later, the destroyer dipped into the atmosphere, its sleek frame glowing against the burning skies. Anti-aircraft cannons roared, their fire drawing the ship closer. The trap worked, the destroyer veered sharply, exposing its underbelly to the colony's defenses. Now! Elena commanded. A pulse from the anti-aircraft system struck true, the destroyer's shields collapsing in a cascade of sparks. A volley of plasma rounds followed, ripping through its hull. The ship careened downward, crashing into a distant ridge. Cheers broke out in the command center, but Elena remained stoic. Focus, she said sharply. This isn't over. Back on the surface, Tara's squad regrouped after repelling the first wave. Report, she said, her breath heavy. Casualties minimal, one of her soldiers replied. But they'll be back. Tara nodded, wiping dirt from her face. Then so will we. The ground battle continued, each skirmish a test of endurance. In orbit, Vraxen seated. His hands clenched behind his back as he watched the destruction of yet another destroyer. This colony is becoming an embarrassment, he growled. What do we have left? 4 cruisers, 2 destroyers, and the secondary carrier, Lake reported. Vraxen's expression darkened. Prepare them all. No more subtlety. Burn that colony to the ground. Elena's comms crackled to life. Captain, new contacts incoming. Looks like the rest of the fleet. She clenched her jaw. They're throwing everything at us now. Orders? Harper asked. Elena stared at the tactical display. Raj, can you amplify the system's output? Not without blowing it up, Raj replied. Then we blow it up, Elena said, her voice firm. One last shot. We disable their fleet, or we don't survive. The room fell silent. Harper finally spoke. Understood. Redirect all remaining power to the system, Elena ordered. Prepare for one final strike. Raj hesitated, then nodded. It's been an honor, Captain. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder. For all of us. The final battle loomed, the Empire's fleet descending like a storm. Elena took one last breath, ready to face the coming fire. The tension in New Bastion's command center was suffocating. The dim glow of the tactical display cast shadows on the exhausted faces of the defense team. Captain Elena Marcus stood tall at the helm, her composure a lifeline to her team, even as the final wave of the Galactic Empire's fleet loomed in orbit. Report, Elena commanded. Enemy ships are closing in, Lieutenant Harper said, his fingers darting across his console. 4 cruisers and 2 destroyers are leading the charge. The secondary carrier is holding position in high orbit, likely coordinating the assault. How long until they're in range? 5 minutes, maybe less. Dr. Raj Patel stepped forward, the strain evident in his eyes. The anti-aircraft system is ready, but it won't survive a full barrage. If we push it beyond capacity, it'll be the last shot we get. Then we make it count, Elena replied. On the surface, the colony was a war zone. Smoke billowed into the sky as Imperial shuttles deployed troops to reinforce their battered ground forces. Sergeant Tara Wells and her squad had retreated to a makeshift stronghold, a rocky outcrop overlooking one of the main approaches to the colony. They're regrouping, Tara said into her comms, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. We've bought some time, but it won't last. Hold your position as long as you can, Elena's voice crackled through. The fleet's our priority now. We're taking one last shot to end this. Tara grimaced but nodded. Understood, Captain. Good luck. She turned to her squad, their faces streaked with dirt and exhaustion. You heard the captain. Let's remind them why they shouldn't underestimate us. The squad prepared for the next wave, their resolve unshaken despite the odds. In orbit, Admiral Vraxen stood at the center of his flagship's bridge, his expression dark. The defeat of his destroyers and carrier had been an embarrassment, but he remained confident in the Empire's ultimate superiority. Deploy all ships, he ordered. Overwhelm their defenses. No half measures. Commander Lake hesitated. Sir, their anti-aircraft system has been surprisingly effective. Perhaps we should. Enough, Vraxen snapped. They've exhausted their tricks. Now they'll face the full might of the Empire. The fleet surged forward, their engines blazing as they closed in on New Bastion. Back in the command center, the atmosphere was electric with urgency. Elena watched the tactical display as the enemy ships approached. Raj, she said, her voice steady, can we target multiple ships with a single blast? It's possible, Raj replied, furrowing his brow. But the system wasn't designed for that kind of output. The capacitors might not hold. They don't need to hold, Elena said. They just need to fire. Raj nodded, understanding the gravity of her plan. I'll make the adjustments. the first salvo from the Imperial fleet rained down on the colony, shaking the command center violently. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and warning lights flashed across the room. "Shields at 15%. Sergeant Lyle shouted. "Harper, redirect power from all non-essential systems to the shields," Elena ordered. "We need every second we can get." "Yes, ma'am," Harper replied, his fingers flying over the controls. Raj's voice cut through the chaos. "Targeting calibration complete. We're ready to fire." "Good," Elena said, her tone firm. "Lyle, lock onto the lead cruiser and its escorts. Let's take them out in one shot." The targeting system hummed as it locked onto the enemy ships. The room fell silent, the tension palpable as everyone waited for Elena's command. "Fire!" The anti-aircraft system roared to life, a blinding surge of energy streaking toward the Imperial fleet. The beam split mid-flight, striking the lead cruiser and its two escorts simultaneously. Their shields flickered and failed, explosions tearing through their hulls. Cheers erupted in the command center, but Elena quickly silenced them. "Stay focused." That was just the beginning. Admiral Vraxin gripped the edge of his console as the holographic display showed the destruction of his lead ships. "Impossible," he muttered. "How can they?" "Admiral," Lake interrupted, his voice tense, "the colony's energy readings are spiking. They've diverted everything to their defenses. If we strike now, we can overwhelm them." Vraxin's eyes narrowed. "Prepare the secondary carrier for a full bombardment. End this now." On the surface, Terra's squad was pinned down as Imperial forces advanced. Plasma bolts scorched the air around them, forcing the humans to stay low. "We can't hold much longer," one of her soldiers shouted. Terra gritted her teeth. "Then we'll take as many of them with us as we can." Before she could give the order to counterattack, a massive explosion lit up the sky. The lead Imperial destroyer had been hit, spiraling out of control before crashing into the rocky plains. The sight reignited the squad's morale. "The captain's still fighting," Terra said with a fierce grin. "So are we." In the command center, Elena watched as the remaining Imperial ships regrouped. The secondary carrier loomed in high orbit, its weapons glowing as it prepared for a final strike. "Raj, can we fire again?" Raj shook his head. "The system's fried. We're out of options." Elena's mind raced. They had dealt significant damage, but the carrier was still a threat. If it fired, the colony would be obliterated. "Harper," she said, her voice steady despite the dire situation, "patch me through to all remaining fighters." "Yes, ma'am," Harper replied, quickly establishing the connection. "This is Captain Marcus," Elena said, her voice carrying a calm authority. "The Empire thinks they've won. They think we're broken. Let's show them what humanity is capable of. All fighters, focus on that carrier. Take it down, no matter the cost." The remaining human fighters launched into the sky, their engines roaring as they ascended toward the carrier. Imperial interceptors swarmed to meet them, the battle erupting in a chaotic dance of fire and steel. One by one, the human ships broke through the defensive screen, their weapons targeting the carrier's vulnerable points. Explosions rippled across its surface, and the massive ship began to falter. On the carrier's bridge, Admiral Vraxin stared at the cascading failures on his display. His arrogance had blinded him, and now his fleet was in shambles. "Admiral," Lake said urgently, "we need to retreat." Vraxin's jaw tightened. For a moment, he considered staying to fight. But the reality was undeniable. "Order the fleet to withdraw," he said bitterly. As the Imperial ships retreated, the command center erupted in cheers. Elena allowed herself a small smile, the weight of victory mingling with exhaustion. "We did it," Harper said, his voice filled with awe. "No," Elena replied softly. "We survived. For now." Outside, the skies cleared, the remnants of the Imperial fleet disappearing into the void. New Bastion had endured, its people proving that humanity's spirit was far from breakable.